with us, and that has allowed us to have this wonderful panel from Bangladesh, from Odisha, and we all together to celebrate a very special book, Our Many Longings, contemporary short fiction from Bangladesh. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Shokat Majumdar. I teach English and creative writing at Ashoka, and it's my great pleasure to invite two people. The first participant is still on his way here, who are involved with this important anthology. Obviously, we wanted to do this earlier. 16 December was going to be the 50th year of the Bangladesh Mukti Juddha, Bangladesh Liberation War, and I think in many ways it's a great year for this collection to come out. So as soon as we got it together, we invited Sohana Manzoor, who has edited the collection. And Sohana is the literary editor of Daily Star, the leading English newspaper of Dhaka. And she's also a professor at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. And she writes regularly for different publications. And I'm really glad that she has put this essentially a landmark collection of short stories together, culled from English as well as translation from Bangla. Joining him is Shamsad Mortuza, who is Pro Vice Chancellor and Dean of also of University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, writer, academic, columnist for the Daily Star. And I think they've made the University of Liberal Arts a really exciting place to be, the kind of new and in many ways, the kind of things we're doing at Ashoka. There are a lot of correspondences with this place. So with that in mind, we're still waiting for, Manu, here, finally. I think our third participant is finally here, fighting the teething tech troubles that we've become very familiar with. Joining us is Manu Dash, the publisher of the Holy Books. As I'm sure most of you know, a really cutting edge and really experimental literary press, which does really amazing work on the interface of English and vernacular based in Odisha. So a lot of important Oriya literature, but a lot of translations from different literatures. And, it's a kind of press which champions what I call the vernacular life of English. So those of us who write in English, but are still very much sort of shaped by vernacular traditions. In many ways, our English carries the echo of that syntax. I think a publisher like Dholi has been great. So I'm really glad that this, this has come out of Dholi. And I read the manuscript, before it was going to press. Then I read it again, and it's my great delight to welcome the three of you and the collection virtually to Ashoka. So thank you for joining us, Manu, Sohana, and Shamsad. So I will start with some general questions. What I will do is I'll ask some questions. Some are addressed to all of you, and some are addressed to specific speakers, specific participants. But of course, feel free to jump in if you have something to say about any of them or respond to each other. It's a very free-flowing, informal kind of an adda, as we say. So it'll be good to hear your thoughts. So I just want to start with the basic question. If you could tell us something about, and our audience about, what is the short story meant in Bangladeshi literary tradition? Obviously, as someone who reads Bangla but is based in Kolkata, has lived in Kolkata, we have this intimate relationship to Bangladesh literature, and also the sheer power of Bangladeshi diasporic literature and sort of homegrown literature in English is also something we are very aware of, as you both embody with the sort of English language media. But so tell us a bit about, what do you think the short story has meant in the various literary traditions of Bangladesh? So any of you can start. Maybe Sohana?
Well, it's kind of a, the history of short story, like in Bangladesh, if I think about it, like it's so huge. I mean, it's difficult to pinpoint like where I should begin. But as a genre, like short story is occupies, I would say, a rather difficult position, because world literature, if you look at it, like it's the novel that always captivate the attention, not so much the short story. And again, if we look at world literature itself, like it's only very recently, I mean, in the last 1 decade since Commonwealth literature sort of started this competition or thing about short story writing, it actually caught the attention. But having said that, like if I look at like the history of Bangla literature, um, in Bangladeshi literary tradition, short story has always had a prominent place. Perhaps it started with the tradition that Rabindranath Tagore and his contemporaries set. I would rather say that Rabindranath Tagore, because his shorter stories are still, something that we read. And but I also mentioned, like in the introduction of this anthology, that these three well-known writers from the 1940s who can be called the predecessor of Bangladeshi writing. I mean, there are others, like there would be probably debate on this, but I was just trying to, focus on a particular timeline as well. So like Abul Manzoor Ahmed, Abu Rushd, Said Waliullah. But what I felt like, if I look at it like 40s, 50s, 60s, I think shorter stories kind of, they're like, captures moments. I mean, they express social problems, tensions, and it's not concerned with life as a whole. We are focusing on a particular moment, but as it does it, I feel that, in different decades, the focus has been on different things. Like, as I mentioned, that if I take up like 1940s, there were, rural themes, social issues, topical themes, partition played a part. There would be like also the 1940s, the famous famine. And then in the 50s, Bhasha Andolon captured, a great deal of historical moment. 60s, I think, was a time that, um, a time of what I would call experiments with the styles, and there were also like um, there was this mass movement, the history, that especially the liberation, the history of Bangladeshi liberation, that was also something that went into this time. 70s, I would say that you would expect that since it was right after the liberation, there would be so much, experiments, but the experiment was not so much with the stylistic aspects, but it was about the liberation war, the problems that the new country was facing. So that is something that went into the 1970s. I'm just giving a general history. I'm not so much into naming people, because that would, I don't know where that would go. But I felt that uh, like short story writers were mostly writing in Bengali, apart from maybe a very handful of few, but that was also within Bangladesh. But it's like, I would say that the late 1990s, that a new scenario kind of developed. Like they were actually writing in English, that really hit the scene. And then and in the recent past, I felt that there are short stories being written in Bangla, written in English, but and I think, I mean, we are kind of exploring a lot of experiments, a lot of uh, social issues that are coming in. So it has become quite vibrant, or that's the way I look at it now. I mean, it's not just novels. I mean, novel was very important, even like I would say 2 decades ago, but it has I mean, shorter story has also come forward, like taking up the space. I think Shamshad sir will probably be able to say it much better than I can.
Right, right. Absolutely. I mean, I was thinking of, bringing Shamshad in because I was also thinking of, something with Ejaz Ahmed, who recently passed away, as you know, said about the Urdu literary tradition, that how when during a very colonially and decolonized, a very politically sort of sort of volatile moment, there's this tradition. Of course, all of us know about this whole Jamesonian argument that there are all these national allegories, and Ahmed points out that they are not always that. This fiction is often unaware of big public moments. They are often concerned with very domestic, very quotidian realities. It's not that there's a kind of a metropolitan bias that, oh, they're always going to talk about the liberation war. They're always going to talk about the big things. And I think, of course, it's impossible to talk about history without reference to the mainstream narratives. But literature, I think, is very idiosyncratic. And I think I was thinking of Ahmed's argument of the Urdu literature in around the time of, the Indian partition or independence, that it was very indifferent to any of that. They were talking about landlords, this, domestic problems, but not necessarily about the foreign colonials. So, Shamshad, I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Right.
what the
Oh,
short story has meant in Bangladesh.
thank you, Shaukat, and thank you, Ashoka, for having us. Like, this is wonderful, and this is a kind of meeting that requires for both Bengals and for Bangla literature. And you're very right. So what Aziz Ahmed was saying, so this national allegory and the other trend of historicizing the moment. I'll just complement what Sohana was saying earlier, and just to give you a background with some names, just for our audience here. And yes, Sohana is very right that Bangla short stories, notwithstanding their political boundaries, enjoy the shared legacy of Tagore. And I was reading an article by Rizia Rahman, and who was saying that, arguing rather, that we're very fortunate that Bangla short stories did not have a childhood. So thanks to Tagore, it started as a very mature genre. And immediately after that, we have that post-Tagore kind of Europe-influenced modernist experiments. And we have that shared legacy, right? So the longings and belongings remained pretty much the same, in across the border. But somehow after the partition in East Bengal, or the challenges for many of these writers became in negotiating with the common heritage of Bangla literature that has its roots in oral tradition and shoots in the works of Tagore, as well as literature of the Kollal group. Now, there is another group who felt the urgency to espouse Islamic ideology. So the urgency to incorporate Farsi and Urdu and Arabic words. And as well as the philosophical aspect of it. And at the same time, so after 1952, so there was this emerging nationalist sensibility with Bangla language as its fulcrum opposed to religious trend, as it refused to be a provincial literature. And at the same time, the agricultural reality of a riverine country heavily dependent on the crop cycle and fish yields gave Bangla literature its own flavor and texture. The writers of short story engaged themselves in identifying the uniqueness of the land. In so doing, many of them distinguished themselves from the cerebral metropolitan alienation available in the writings of West Bengal. But the popularity of the communist movement, the Marxist orientation of some of these writers posed peculiar paradox. Shahid Ali's Gibral's Wing, so Gibraltar Dana is a case in point. The ultimate surrender to fate vis-a-vis social disparities exposes the dilemma in East Pakistan. Now, the partition pang made many lose their confidence in religion-based politics. Writers like Alauddin Al-Ajad represent such voice. Syed Waliullah and Syed Shamsul Haq introduced Western form and diction to express local reality. Now, in the 60s, the centenary of Tagore happened, and that allowed our writers to integrate Tagore to what turns out to be our mainstream Bangla literature. Now, interestingly, the ban on Tagore by the Pakistani rulers turned Tagore into an instrument of resistance. That is interesting, and that in a way defined our literature in our part of the land. And of course, then 1971 happened, and it became the defining moment for Bangla short stories. Now, against the oppression of the rulers, stories became the chronicles of human miseries and struggles. They became the cenotaphs of national pride and confidence. The writers of 50s and 60s who were conflicted by the national identity question emerged as powerful voices with greater convictions. Mahmudul Haq, Akhtaruzzman Ilyas, so they incorporated surrealism, magic realism to show their alertness to the emerging trends in world literature. But after 1975, so when Bangabandhu was assassinated and the military government took over, so it resulted in deep frustrations and to some extent, a type of escapism. So they were not dealing with the political reality. So the situation was such that, there was kind of an escapism which allowed writers like Humayun Ahmed to become popular with lucid language without getting politically engaged. And so he was very successful in capturing middle class sentiment without delving into seriousness. Now, as you were saying earlier, that there are two main schools of writing in post-partition Bangla short stories. The first group focuses on social and political reality, as well as the psychological crisis. Abu Rushd, Abu Jafar Shamsuddin, Shaukat Osman, Rabia Khatun, Rashid Karim, and others. So they fall into this category where they rely on descriptions. The other category of writers remains conscious on plot, but they focus more on capturing the essence of their time. Shaukat Ali, Selena Hossain, Rashid Karim, Rahat Khan are cases in point. But the anthology that we are dealing with, so it presents a different reality. Of course, we have the experimental group of writers who found their niche in little magazines and chapbooks, but the anthology presents writers who are writing in English. And at the same time, the advent of technology has given another new platform where they can question the commodification of literature while making us aware of our complicit nature. I think we can carry on with the conversation as we go along, but
Yeah.
I would stop
That's
here.
really interesting. I mean, I was wondering about in what way a collection of short stories which calls itself contemporary short fiction from Bangladesh kind of both continues and troubles the nation of a notion. Notion of a nation. That's the trouble. The idea of a nation. How does it do that? And I think you've already answered that question really, really beautifully, because you can make a collection around a nation, but of course the collection never exactly quite reflects it, because literature and reality have a very complex relationship, which I think sometimes gets lost. In the world of reviewing and reception, people, it's sometimes easy to have a kind of a reductive sociological approach that, oh, this is about Bangladesh, learn about Bangladesh. I want to bring Manu into the discussion, because, of course, he's the person who made the book possible and let the book out in the world, and has continued with many wonderful books from Holly, which I keep reading. And I think especially I'm, as I said, that I'm really excited about the kind of work Holly is doing, because it's sort of champions the interface between the Bhasha, the modern Indian languages, South Asian languages, and English. And Sohana says something very interesting in her introduction, that there are four groups of writers, or there are those writers writing in Bangla from Bangladesh, writers writing in English from Bangladesh, writers writing in English from overseas, the diasporic writers, and writers writing in Bangla but living abroad. So this very interesting interface of different writers, and I'm sure it can be looked at in many other ways. But right there, and of course, we know the Bangladeshi diaspora is a huge one. I mean, many people don't know that Bengali is the fourth largest, I think probably fourth or fifth most popular language in the world. I mean, that is because, of course, it doesn't have the cultural capital of French or Spanish, but in many ways, it's such a large language. And that has come from not only the very dense part of this world, but also the global diaspora. So I was thinking that is a very interesting sort of classification it makes. And I wanted us to ask Manu, what did this range mean to you as a publisher? This diversity, this sort of play between English and Bangla primarily, but of course, as well as other languages, is Urdu, Farsi behind their the tradition. So why was this attractive? This anthology, Manu, if you can say that. Manu, you're on mute. I think you need to unmute yourself. Yeah, perfect.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Now you
are. Thank you, Shaikat, Sohana, and Shamsad, and especially to Ashoka University for arranging this discussion. and taking this book to a new level, different level. Um, and certainly, I was just before replying to your question, I was thinking how Dhauli is connected with Ashoka. You'll be astonished to know Dhauli Shanti Stup, who is 8 kilometers away from Bhubaneswar city, where Ashoka has fought the Kalinga war and won there. And from there, he became one Chandashok to Dharmashok. And where and Buddhism spread around the world from that place, it is believed, and that is the historians will tell how much how true it is. But this is the story goes like this. And Bangladesh in particular uh, fascinates me from my childhood. I have already written in my publisher's note. I have met a few Bangladeshis, watched them from, I have grown with them also. I have seen people, and Bangladesh wartime reporting in Odia, the radio, has a deep impact in our social life. We talk, besides that, a common catastrophe we share, Bangladesh and Odisha, that is a cyclone. And Bangladesh had in Chittagong in 1963 had a very severe cyclone that ravaged that city. The way it has damaged like anything in 1999, that is called a super cyclone that ravaged the whole Odisha at that time. Around 10,000, as per the government's statement, 10,000 people died in one night itself. Besides this language, yes, Bangladesh is those who speak in Bengali, and we are very near to Bengali, and how we share our language, our food, our clothing, many things culturally we share. Besides that, when Sohana is telling about the four groups of writers, one is this some writers, Muslim writers writing in Bengali about the Muslims' life prior to the independence, 1947. After that, there are another group who were writing it, and their style, they were very matured in their style, theme, and language, etc., which has come of age. Then another thing, she has told that the women voice also emerged powerfully, and they questioned about the feminism reality, as well as the that questions on the gender also, and the reality life of the females in Bangladesh. I was basically fascinated by out of this, since I do not know the language. I either read it in translation in English or diaspora writers. Tehmima Anam, Monica Alice did Brick Line, if I remember. I have seen the first film that on Bangladesh, and I liked very much, which has got a Booker's Award, I think. Besides that, uh, so then I was searching for the people. It was almost more than 5 years I was planning to bring out a book, and I am fortunate that I got a very good editor. She's a very erudite and a very incisive mind of what to take, what not to take, and I am quite pleased with the way she has taken. And I look forward that it is not only the stories she has taken, these are written in the backdrop of Bangladesh or Dhaka or like that. You can find Dubai, you can find America, you can find many other places. So as a whole, and if at all we want to reach to the people, it may be a small country in comparison to India, but it's a rich legacy is there. It is very, it's a cinema, it's a literature are very high standard. And we are aware many people from Bangladesh, they are very good in a literature. Their contribution is immense towards the world literature. And as a publisher, I think it is my responsibility to take them to to the different countries in the international language that is called English, so that the people could know that how beautifully they are writing. That is the basic purpose of my publishing this book, and I am so happy and glad that Sohana took the challenge and she did it very well.
Oh yeah, she definitely did, and I'm really glad that you stepped ahead. I think I couldn't imagine a better publisher than Thawli to bring this book out. I mean, I was
Thank
listening,
you.
I was thinking of, I was hearing Professor Jatin Naik talk a couple of weeks back. I don't know if you know him, but he was talking a lot about, the kind of close symbiosis between Odia and Bangla literature. So the kind of
Yes,
connections that
yes,
they were
yes.
there very much so. So I mean, I was also thinking of those connections. That why would a collection of stories from Bangladesh be particularly appealing to a publisher based in Odisha, of course, a national publisher, but based in Odisha. So that was also came to my mind. I wanted to talk about maybe a couple of specific stories, and I'm going to turn to a story translated by Shamsad, Torso. That's the title of the story. A very powerful story. I was very moved by that story. And it's a story that those of you who haven't read it, it's a story about there's a lot of violence in the story. It's really that the violence of the war, and it's not just about violence, but it's also majorly about reclaiming the body. What happens to the body after death, which is, I think, a perpetual concern going back to the Homeric epics to all the way. How do you get the body back? And how does one do the last rites? And I think in that, the writer locates a very sort of a sort of a something subcontinental people know very well, that how to tell a Hindu and a Muslim apart, by the of course a man apart by looking at the genitals, and that is something that comes up in the story. And I mean, I don't want to give it away for those who haven't read it, but it's what really struck me. Of course, it reminded me of many of the stories of Manto, but what it also struck me, that it's a very tender story. Also, it's a very tender story. It's a story of great intimacy, and I was really moved by the way violence and intimacy came together in the story. That it was, and of course, the role of family. So I wanted to ask Shamshad particularly about his experience translating this story, and specifically, how does one sort of work this language of intimacy from Bangla to English? What were the challenges? Because there's this private language, you know, and at the same time, it's happening against this pretty violent public landscape. So how did you manage that? It's a beautiful translation. It's very moving. It reads like an original. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the experience translating the story.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so the reference to Iliad and maybe Antigone, is quite apt. Like, how do you negotiate with a dead body? Like, when the state and the law, like, and the justice, like, and all the ideological factions are divided. But I translated the story by Afsan Chaudhuri, and those of us, like, who know Afsan Chaudhuri know how well researched he is on our liberation war. So there is hardly any village that he hasn't traveled to or collected materials for his historical archive. So he probably had, 3,000 hours of materials. So he's like, kind of a national archive incarnate. So his story cannot be separated from his historical consciousness. So he is known for his conviction, which does not necessarily conform with the mainstream sanctioned and sanitized history. So there's something brutal, and he's brutally honest, in his personal life as well as in his narrative. And that is why I had to be extra careful and extra cautious, knowing him personally, as a colleague, as a journalist. And because he's a journalist, so he also writes in a language that is devoid of unnecessary diction. The economy of language complements the lack of emotion in the text. So you said it's tender, but then again, it's tender in a very peculiar way. It's typically Bengali sentiment, so it probably would get lost in translation. And the key factor that you mentioned, that, he wants his readers to have that shock effect, so there's a shock effect without giving you that shock. So, for example, the way we find a recently widowed Malati, so accepting her fate, So it shows the helplessness of a group of people who were dying for no faults of their own, right? So the markers that separate one community from the other, so the Shidur, the Shaka, and all that, so they're all arbitrary. So even if you think of the, tupi and whatever markers you're wearing, so the little boy, Kamal, can easily become Kamal. All right. So the little girl, Bimola, so she had to choose a name after a bird, Moina. Right. So something very local, but then again, that can hide your religious identity.
Doesn't give the religion away.
Yes. And in order to avoid the quizzes of the Rajakars, right? And so the family, it goes to a killing field to claim the body of the father, Shankar, or the main man of the house. And emotions, there is no scope for emotion because the burial is the of utmost importance, right? So it finds a secondary place as the family focuses on giving Shankar his last rite. Now, when they go to the school ground, they found that the guard had arranged the severed heads separated from the decapitated torsos, right? And in the dark, so the body and the head, so that could not be distinguished. And when they were carrying it back home, so the identity marker changed, and it is the phallus that became the identity marker, as you were saying a moment back. Now, the irony is what, this turned out, the phallus turned out to be the saving grace, right? Now, it is the phallus, the source of male chauvinism, it is the source of testosterone rush, that is responsible for the war, violence, and whatnot. And it also became the identity marker. But the dehumanization and the emasculation of the body, even if after it is deceased, somehow the balance has to be restored. And the burial or the cremation, that would restore that balance. So for the widow, that is of utmost importance. So if you want to stay back in a country, so what is more important, flee away with your colleagues, with your family members, or stay back just to make sure that your husband gets the, last rite. So I think that was the most difficult part, to get that emotion across, because there is this lack of emotion, and at the same time, paradoxically, it is full of emotions. So how do you negotiate that space? And I do not know, whether I've done justice to the story, but I was really moved when I was reading it, and I had the itch to get that story across, because this is a story that needs to be told and retold. So when we have so many hatred all around us, so I think this is a story that reminds us of our essential human self.
Yeah, no, that's a very powerful story. And I really admired the point you made that sometimes sparedness, this is something I often talk about in my creative writing classes, that, maximum output with minimum input, don't go overboard, but that dryness,
Yeah.
let the reader feel the emotion, don't show it. And it's very interesting that you connect it with certain kind of journalistic prose, that journalism reportage
Yeah.
teaches you a certain way of
Right.
and you're right, now that you mention it, there is that quality of reportage in the story, though of course the family members are talking, it feels very intimate to me. But just out of curiosity, what was the Bengali title of Torso? What
Thor.
was Dhod?
Thor.
Of course, that makes sense. I was thinking that, and Dhod is that's very interesting. I mean, I don't know how many in the audience knows Bangla, but Dhod is kind of more disembodying than torso.
Yeah.
Torso brings up the sort of idea of sculpture. It brings up the idea of sculpture. It brings up all kinds of artistic references. Dhod is very bare. It's
Yeah.
very, there's nothing fancy about it. It's very brutal. It's a very brutal word. And it's interesting that you sort of translated Dhod, and you kind of made it more beautiful. Though Thor is a uh, more
It,
brutal mode, right?
in
Yeah.
Oriya, it will call Gondi.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
is that the sort of the just a dead body. Dhod, I think mostly. I mean, I don't think dhod would be used in an artistic.
No, no.
Um, I
But
mean,
there is also a pun on Dhor which I could not get, of course, in English. Like Dhor, so so this holding, right? So Dhor, Dhora, and the body, like so the that nuance I think is lost in translation, and I think that's something that you have to lose, I guess. But something else is gained, as you were saying, that the sculptural self, the sculpted self, rather. Yeah.
yes, yes, yeah. No, I wasn't. I was sort of
Mm.
going through the possible Bangla names for it. I didn't think of it right away. But yeah, torso is a more gentle word than Thor, which
Mm.
is really interesting. Um, well, I mean, now that we are talking about languages, I can't help but pose what I would call a fairly provincial question to both of you, Sohana and Shamshad, as a Bangali. Is that what do you feel are the relationships, continuities, and discontinuities between the literature between the two Bengals? Both in Bengali and English. You've already mentioned Rabindranath, but how or in other relevant languages, because I'm sure there are other languages too. How do you feel it plays out? In this, and of course, across visa and passport requirements. And I'm also interested in. I have a question for Manu too later about question of distribution and all. But how do you feel the two Bengals are still talking to each other today? I know we were very much in conversation, obviously till independence and those decades of the 20th century. But what's happening now? What are they noting each other? Are they talking? Are they interacting? What are your thoughts to both of you, Sohana and Samshad? Sohana, do you want to get started?
Yeah, maybe Swana can start.
Well, the literature of both Bengals have a common past. We know that, but somewhere along the line, I think there was a division. I would say that the partition producing India and Pakistan, and then the liberation war of Bangladesh, are two events that probably brought in some differences. For Bangladesh, the history of the liberation war, in some ways, probably is more immediate, maybe more, I don't want to say more painful, but definitely more immediate, with the specific markers in the sense that, the process began in 1905 with Bongo Bongo, and then in 1947, and then again in 1971. So this has been like I mean, if you look at the literature of Bangladesh, you will see that the trauma of the liberation war and, the fact that it has been, of such length um, and, even though for us more than 50 years have passed, I would say that the language and the culture, uh, yes, in some ways they bind the two Bengals, but perhaps the language movement um, and the role that the Bengali language plays in the War of Independence is something that is um, very significant in understanding Bangladeshi literature. Because I often felt, or critics have often also noticed or made comments on this, that uh, um, probably it's also partly responsible for the growth of an English literature in Bangladesh in some ways. And so I would say that there are, cultural connection between the two countries that, sort of bind them together. But there are also many differences because it has been a, long time. There are like religious differences. There are certain cultural differences. And there are like have taken up different routes, and Bangladeshi writing lately has also taken up a whole new world by itself, and it has certainly come a very long way from the peripheral literary existence that was in the 1940s. So yeah, I think the dialogues between the two Bengals would be interesting. I mean, they do take place, uh, but there are also like essential differences that I also see now at this point.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Sohana. Shamsad, your thoughts on that? I'm also curious to know if there are, apart from Bangla and English, other languages in which Bangladeshi literature is being written. If this thing, because we keep hearing about these two languages mostly, but there are other languages. But of course, Bangla and English are what would kind of create the conversation between the two Bengals. But yeah, your take on this question generally?
So you're asking about the Bong connection, huh?
Yeah, Babong connection.
Right.
That's
Uh,
connection.
right. So I was thinking of Anjan Dutt's movie, and so, uh, but you know what, so when we listen to Chondil and others on YouTube, and you hear that Bangla is almost a lost cause in West Bengal, nobody speaks Bangla in Calcutta anymore, and when you go to Calcutta, so you hear English or Hindi, right? So I think the onus is actually on us to celebrate Bangla, and we are not ashamed of using vernacular language, the street language, or the provincial, rural language. And when you see the caricature of it on Z Bangla, so the Bengal, saying in a certain dialect and all that, uh, there is no shame and inhibition about it. But having said that, when you have an anthology like Sohana's one, uh, it represents these four classes that Sohana and you were talking about, so it's all the permutations of combination, Bangla in Bangla, Bangla outside of Bangla, then Bangla in in English translation, and then someone with English writing about Bangladesh, someone like Monica Ali, uh, who preferred being called as a British citizen, and we insist on tagging that Bangla ticket to her. So that's very interesting to see
Oops, has he frozen, Shamshad? Uh,
I think he'll be back, probably internet connection,
oh, I think his internet connection is probably a bit. Uh,
probably because I lost mine for a, yeah, there he is.
oh, Shamshad, we lost you for a bit, but you're back.
Sir, you need to unmute yourself.
Sound.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, basically, Kayum sir is here, and we talked about the anthology and the canon formation. So when you have an anthology like this one, we have 19 short stories, and Sohana does not claim these short stories as a representation of Bangladesh. She's not a cultural gatekeeper, but what she's doing, so she's offering kind of an assortment of representation of Bangla short stories. So what we have here, so our many longings, not only has in doing so, she has not only translated our culture, but also transgressed our national boundary. So the inclusion of diasporic writers who write in English as contemporary short stories from Bangladesh presents a new reality. And I think it's the same for writers from West Bengal. So the international locations of some of the stories, written by Faiza Hasnat, Farah Ghaznavi, Hassan Al Zayed, Bin Bahara, Rizia Rahman. And so we have 5 or 6 stories located outside of Bangladesh. So they point at an expansive reality of our Bengalis abroad. Now, some of them are written in Bangla, some of them are written in English, but their endorsement by mainstream press. So this is surely going to create certain tension between the two types of Bangla. So we are already seeing some signs of it, and especially during the Lit Fest, it became very obvious. There are some experimental self-reflexive writers such as Kaziani Samed and Kaisar. And they were very interestingly, so if you read the stories, Ram Kamal's gift and the Emperor's New Clothes, so you will see that there is this urgency to blend in, even though they find that there is an intellectual vacuum. So in Bangladesh, there is frustration, and as Dr. Rani is he longs for a collective manual in which telling us how to remain vital in a city without letters. So this idea that, so we are living in a country where Bangla short stories are not intellectual enough, and so this educated middle class, like, who have been trained abroad, so they have the urgency to bring back culture. So this is something, I would think that, this is a new trend. And what we have today, so not only we have two Banglas, we also have two different sensibilities. So there is an elite sensibility imbued in the literature of the world, and the other expressed through the perspectives of disenfranchised people who rant on political issues plaguing the nation. So I think, like, this is again another avenue that needs to be further examined. Thank you for now.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. The rural, the provincial, and the working class gets a kind of an urgency in some of the stories, and that is, and at the same time, the diasporic. I remember a story set in New York, one in the Middle East, and there's,
Yeah.
I mean, really the fascinating range of the diaspora, and yet in some ways, the homecoming through the language. I was thinking of this talk given by a Calcutta writer in the book fair Lit Fest, I think a couple of years back, and it was a fascinating story how he was picked up at Dhaka airport in the middle of the night, and he got into this cab, half not sure where he's going, and the cab kept going for a long time. He started feeling really worried, like, am I in the right company? Are they going to take me to the right place? Am I going to be in trouble? And then there's a moment when the cab stops at a petrol pump, a gas station, and suddenly he sees something very interesting. He sees the petrol pump, the markers written in Bangla, and he says that that's a great moment of safety for me. I'm like, everything, all my fears just vanished, like for somebody from Calcutta to see something like that in Bangla is incredible, because obviously in India, Bangla, even in Calcutta, you don't have those things written in Bangla. It's either English at the most in Hindi. But to see the place of Bangla in public life, and I felt like I'm safe in a country where the petrol pump, is written in Bangla. Nothing can go wrong. It's very irrational. So it's really fascinating how these things really come to play. We have a couple of questions, but I wanted to just ask a question for Manu, since we're talking about the two the two countries divides. Manu, if you feel if there's a readership distribution divide between Bangladesh and India, how do books kind of go back and forth, and how has the reception been of this book so far?
Thank you, Shaikat. In fact, before publishing the book, I had talked to a few Bangladesh distributors,
Mhm.
and some people accepted that Botighor, and they are doing very well. And the reception is amazing. I am keeping following up about their response, and I am very happy. Even if it has published in December, not many months ago, and it is quite good. The sale is quite good. Besides that, in India also, specifically in Bengal, many people have also response is very favorable. One thing I let me tell you, I am a publisher first. I have to see about the market also. Without that, there is no point of bringing out the books. It has a great opportunity, but I cannot tell that it is like it should be sold like a pulp fiction. It is a serious literature work, and it will take its own time, and it will take a long time. It will go for a long time, that I can foresee. It is not going to be just in a month or two or a year. It is going to lose its steam. It will go places, that is I am sure of. And it is also available, very well received in Amazon in India. We have only one problem, that we are not able to market it in overseas, but we are getting orders, and people are in touch with us. We are trying through Amazon. It has not been so far done due to some technical problems.
Yeah, I think we have just got a query from one of the participants here. It's available overseas. Someone who
Yes.
just not was asking.
If at all, if somebody wants, we can send through the courier from here. There is no problem at all.
Mhm.
Right.
So let me turn to the questions from the audience. There's a question from Dia Sengupta, and she's asking, I have a question for Sohana. How difficult was it translating provincial Bangladeshi Bangla into English? Were there certain words that you had trouble translating? Would love to know your thoughts. I think this is a question with both Sohana and Shamsad can answer, and Shamsad has touched on this question already to a degree in my question about torso. Dhod itself is a great example of that. But Johanna, do you want to speak as an editor to that in response to that question?
I'm sorry, I didn't get to hear the first part of the question. Can you repeat it?
I have a question for Sohana. So if you click on the Q&A button, the question will come up. You can see the question. I have a question for Sohana. How difficult was it translating provincial Bangladeshi Bangla into English? Were there certain words that you had trouble translating? Would love to know your thoughts. I think it's a really interesting question because,
Okay.
I mean, obviously, many of the stories give a great sense of provincial and very working class Bangla. And it's very interesting to think of that translation. So yeah, Sohana.
Yes, I mean, I happen to be one of those translators. I mean, I'm more interested in not in literal translation, transcreation, what you call it. So, I mean, because, Bangla and English, they are both two different languages. So things that, make good sense in Bangla, sometimes if I translate them in English, it probably wouldn't make sense at all. So it's like the target language. I have to consider that, the audience of the target language. And when I chose the stories, like there are 7 Bengali stories here, I mean, that have been translated into English. I basically approached translators who are kind of like really strong. I have seen them translating for Daily Star and elsewhere. And I thought that they would, do justice to the story and to the audience. And I felt that all of them actually did a very good job. I mean, there were some small problems, and we discussed with the translators and see how to make it better, because I also asked the original authors to give it a reading, so see if they have any problems and issues. But most actually didn't. So I mean, it turned out to be really good. I mean, as an editor, I mean, I usually face a lot of problems when I'm working for Daily Star. But when it came to translation for this anthology, I would say that it was not much of a problem. I mean, I don't know if it's professional to say it, but I felt that the translations were well done. I was very happy with the level of work that was given here. I mean, all of them.
So yeah, no, that's
So
very natural, definitely. I mean, I think the whole discussion about Thor and torso is actually an example of this particular. I mean, Thor,
yes,
but not a particularly provincial word, but it's a colloquial word, and I think
yes. I mean, I think there was a suggestion. I mean, earlier this story was translated by somebody else, and I think it was called Dead Body or something. But Dead Body sounds so mundane. I mean, I felt that it doesn't really capture what Thor suggests in Bangla. I mean, it's a stark word, very strong, and probably to some extent, maybe torso is not the exact translation, but I felt that it offers so much more than mere dead body. So it kind of
hmm, oops,
Yeah.
Hannah's internet connection.
how it is. There is this body without head. I mean, it also kind of, I don't know, I felt that it's just uh, it serves its purpose. It's good.
Right. Of course, the main difference is that.
And you're right. I mean, there have been, yes.
No, no, go ahead, please. I was.
No, and also like apart from this one, like there were others. Like I translated one by Rizia Rahman, and it's called Petra. And you know, the dialect was basically the Kuli language. That is not pure Bengali. That is dialect. And sometimes I had a tough time, like trying to figure out what exactly it would be. But then I sort of thought that, I would have to remember, like the audience, they have to also understand it. And I mean, I don't really like putting in too many footnotes and stuff. So I kind of chose the middle ground and, tried to translate the story so that it makes sense and capture the sense that it tries to get across. And there was another story by Shaheen Akhtar. It's called Green Passport. In Bangla, Bengal, it is Shobuj Passport, it was. And since you were talking about like what other kinds of literature is there, what other language, and this is written in Bangla, but it captures a different society, like, you know, that the different group of people, like the Bihari, who are stuck in Bangladesh. There's this Bihari camp in Nipur, and it's about them, their life, their struggle. So it's not exactly a different dialect, but it's about a different group of people who don't have the, you know, the identity as of being Bangladeshis. So yeah, so I was just remembering that story.
So that is one very remarkable thing about this collection, that its imagination of a nation is certainly not urban or metropolitan, which is something which ends up happening often in the subcontinent, that the imagination, going back to the nationalism, it ends up being very urban. But this, I think you guys do a wonderful job in bringing the remote, the rural into the imagination, as well as the urban and the diasporic. So this is again a remarkable job. So any other concluding thoughts anybody wants to make on this collection? Anything you feel we haven't sort of talked about? Of course, I mean, I'm very interested in the way it troubles the idea of the nation, because we get an idea, and yet I think that's why the title Our
Yes,
Longings is so
yes,
beautiful. It is that sense
yes.
of
I have
unfinished.
been asked by
Yeah.
many about the title. So as I was thinking, like, you know, how did the title came to be? And as I was listening to the discussion today, I was also thinking, like, you know, because history is never one. I mean, we might want to establish as one history, the one true story, but it's never like that. It's always multiple. And, you know, and it's also difficult for a collection like this, like it's only 19 short stories. Well, I cannot say that it represents Bangladesh. It's kind of more like a sampling of what we have here. And, you know, it's, at best, I can say that it kind of captures a sliver of such a construct. And like when I was getting ready with the anthology, I mean, the name came later, the title came later. But when I asked my contributors, I asked each of them to choose or write a story that they think have arrested a quintessential aspect of Bangladeshi spirit. And they gave me what they considered suitable. And when I put them, I didn't know what I was getting. I mean, I knew some, I got some immediately, but I didn't know really like all the stories that I was getting. But when I put them together, when I started thinking about an appropriate title, I realized that each of these pieces, it was like a haunting, um, you know, hauntingly preoccupied with these ideas of nation, identity, loss, desire, limits, borders. And also there's this abiding sense of nostalgia. And, you know, I could recognize the pains, you know, the sufferings that are going into it, like the diasporic stories, mistaken identity, or the problems that women face. So there are like all kinds of, you know, themes. So on one aspect, you know, it was a little problematic, but I also realized, you know, this is how a life is. This is how we look at things, and this is very much us. And I remember that I was talking to Ahsan Chaudhuri, the author of story, as you know, saying that okay, this is a, you know, a very powerful short story, and he said that it's not a story. It's what happened in 1971, and somehow that thing got stuck in my mind. You know, these are like fragments of stories, and each of these stories capture some significant aspects of Bangladeshi consciousness. And then again, like I said, that it's not a complete story, but it's just a part of who we are and what we are. I thought that's how I feel about, you know, Our Many Longings.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just add to that? Like, you know, so Sohana, like, you know, congratulations on this wonderful volume. And I cannot thank you enough because of not only of the fact that, like, you know, so you have brought together these 19 beautiful short stories and making me a part of this journey. And thank you, Manu, for patronizing Sohana. This is something that we lack, Bangladeshi writers. We have a story, but often we do not have a platform to share that story. So this book has given a platform, and Sohana's editorial experience with the Daily Star allowed her to handpick certain writers. And that's why, she's very lucky, very fortunate, because she knew what to expect from these authors. And that was one of the challenges I had, to know that, I am translating someone whom I really know very well, and someone who is very choosy about his own work. And that's the beauty of the book, because most of the authors have seen the translations, and they kind of pre-approved before they got into print. So that kind of authorial intervention makes this book unique. So there is this kind of a seal of approval from the authors and the translators. So that kind of engagement is not always there. And this can only happen because this is a contemporary collection. So many of the authors are living, or they have already written in English. So I think for me, for example, when I used the title Torso, Afsan Chaudhary was not happy with it. So he probably suggested the body, and then
alive, right? The torso could be alive, but Thor is obviously dead. That is one big difference. Yeah.
And then so he kind of agreed. And as for the language, so somebody asked that question, the provincial language. Say, for example, how do you talk about the genital? So the slang word. So if you have noticed that I have used willy for the first one, and then I use the idea of a rod when I refer to the same genital later on. So as if so there's a willy and a Muslim genital, which is stronger than the, other, so the process of see the masculinity and how it speaks, so that had to be shared. And how do you do that? And so in English, you have those nuances, but maybe in Bangla, you just had one word, but while translating, so I had to capture that nuance going on. So, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. That really is a wonderful, way the process of the book is really comes out well. Manu, any last words before?
Yes, yes, I have. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yeah.
I am more interested now to publish more books from Bangladesh. If anybody is there, take a. I am there, always open. Anybody can submit there, because I want to see more and more books. It can add to my list, and I'm sure there are certainly regional literature available there, specifically fiction and novels.
Right. No, that's wonderful news. So all of you listening there, there is a really generous and supportive publisher, and having known many of Holly's books, I can tell you that this is a
Thank you. You are so kind.
Thinking of Hoshang's collection you've done, I think of Sachi's essays. So there's so many books you've done of late, and I really enjoyed reading so many of them. I loved Sohana's use of the word sampling. I think this is really, and I think for all of us in India, it's a fascinating experience in many ways. Of course, I keep reading Bangladeshi literature in Bangla, but to read this together, the range of it, was a wonderful sense of seeing somebody familiar and yet not quite. There's a slight difference. I think that's when we look at each other, in that slightly sort of shaded mirror. And also the sense of diaspora as somebody who's spent many years in the West and moves back and forth, is I can see that connection also come alive really well. And again, I think in some ways this collection does a better job bringing the rural and the provincial together than what I've seen in many collections coming out of India, which I think they are also moved beyond. I think the early years of Indian English literature was very urban, very elite. We've moved beyond that point now, but even now, I think the range I think captured in this collection is really admirable. So thank you all. Thank you for being here, and thank you. Does anybody have a copy of the book? My copy is not right here. I want you to fold it up and share it. Yes, there
Yes.
it is. There's that lovely,
Yes.
beautiful. Thank you. Please hold it up, and I really want as many of you to get it as possible, because this is really, I think, for those of you who don't know a lot about Bangladeshi literature, this is probably the best introduction you'll find at the moment, best, and then it'll sort of lead you to many directions, follow up on all these writers and read much more, and both between English and Bangla and translation. So it's a wonderful interaction. So thank you very much for being here on a Sunday
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you very much. Thank you for having us here.
yes, no, we are
It
really
was a
delighted.
privilege.
And
Thank you, Shaikat. Thank you, Sohana, and thank you, Shamsad.
we'll continue
It's
this.
really, I enjoyed the total session.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sorry, I just noticed something. Probably it's not important, but as I was looking at our names, Shoikat, Dani, and Shamsad sir, what are our names?
For our
Yes.
Same.
right?
Starts from S.
I just couldn't help noticing.
I think
Suddenly,
Bengalis have a thing for the S
Yeah.
word,
Yes,
S name, and clearly the M is popular last name too.
Right.
there's a
There are
Manudas is Manudas.
many,
SM, SM, SM.
SM, yeah, exactly. That is, so great.
Would love to
Still
publish more books.
continue with it. I'll let you go now, and thank you all for listening in, and those of us who've been listening on YouTube. And this session is going to be available online. It'll be archived, so you can watch it anytime. Share it with your friends and network, and and we look forward to catching up again in one of our events. So thanks a
Thank
lot.
you for all support, Saikat.
Yes,
I'm grateful.
no, it's a delight. Thank you.
So
Bye bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everyone. Thank you.